in it.
Watch out for what you pray for.
Actually, it's something like good appetite.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Somewhere in the ballpark.
Boyd provincia.
Yeah.
I think
Food provincia.
it was Judy was already gone.
Good appetit.
And I had to come over and I was like, I need you to explain to them what they have coming.
My wife has no appetite. She's got a.
She's sick?
I know that everybody before.
Oh, wait, I knew about this.
Well,
I knew about this.
It was what,
I
93?
forgot what day it is.
It was before
Tomorrow.
93?
And,
2003.
I haven't had one in a while, but each time I have one, I say the same thing. Surely,
I think
since the last time I had one, you've come up with a better way to prepare.
to do this, yes.
I had,
And I get told, no.
yeah, I agree.
Don't think that's just how that works.
I would think they could invent something that cleans as it goes. I don't know.
But I had several timers.
I've had, yeah, I would have had
That
that.
was just about good.
What good was that?
She has to wake up at 4:30 in the morning and take some
That's what I
stuff.
understand.
And she doesn't do mornings. Not at all.
Yeah.
So you working on your phone or computer?
Computer. It worked.
You got the airplane. I couldn't do it last week. I think it's something wrong with my computer.
What did they do?
Did you
Try your phone. It'll run. Well, don't try it now. I got a message.
I was teaching my class Sunday afternoon. All of a sudden, Mike Enoch put up something on it from his phone.
You can't do that.
Sure.
You can override.
Yeah. Well, that was the only problem I had tonight. When the code comes up on the screen and I put it into my computer, 3 or 4 times it wouldn't take it. So I had to back out of it and start over again, and then it would accept my code to connect.
So when you first turned it on, what screen did you have?
It says computer HDMI 1.
Right.
And then I get on screen mirroring on the bar up top. And then it comes up airplane. And I get the number.
That's the part I haven't known is the screen. I mean, obviously they do that, but I just kind of thought it did go automatically.
No, on the back, you gotta, in fact, on the phone, you have to click on something.
Well, right, no, on the phone you do have to tell it to mirror.
Yeah, you have to, yeah,
On my computer, usually it just comes up airplane and I put in the code and it works.
well,
We got the wish version.
Yeah, I know.
it's,
Something about.
that one right there.
Oh,
It's got 2 little windows and.
Oh, yeah.
That's the
Well,
one.
I've looked at it, you taught me that before, because I didn't realize that I was gonna do that. Oh, it just went to my,
Oh, yeah, you can do it the other way too.
just went to my settings and pick up display. Well, it won't show the, I'm not sure it won't show that up. So now I missed you up.
But I'm not sure why.
Somebody told me you had problems last week. Had to use a cable.
Yeah, I did. And then downstairs, I had been having trouble on Sunday.
Well, Steve Weaver tried to show a video.
Day before
Had the
yesterday,
same problem.
about 2:30 in the morning,
Jared Clayton was helping.
my dog
Walk out a cable.
and I could tell there was nothing sparking. Normally they
He
stay in
finally
the
decided he
house.
found
My
something wrong
son,
with Steve's laptop. He had a
was here
C laptop.
you know,
HDMI, I think it,
Smith's best friend here on
okay, it wasn't turned on.
so he came for Jason Brothers funeral. And then he
Technology is wonderful when it works.
Well,
So,
the work is just.
he's allergic to dogs. So I made my dog stay outside. He said, yeah. So, I thought they were involved in purchase because of the. So I went in there and my wife was up and I said, you know what's going on? We didn't know. So I opened the door, that door, and it says open door, the aroma hit me. That had killed the skunk.
We got right on. Donna's not here tonight, but I thought, well, we can still take him home. I don't know, should arrange something.
We go separately. I'm good. Appreciate it.
No problem.
You know, when you walk on,
Nah.
we
drive one vehicle, and either his wife or my wife will think so.
Okay. So don't have your meetings together.
Or email from the security, young life, you went to what?
Oh, man. I had one about
You're lying to me, it's about service.
Medicare. Carrier wanted me to do, it's big on this in the debt creation. And they, I sent her a free check to them. And I sent her one of those at home tests.
That I don't
And
know
so
about
when
that.
I saw my regular doctor, he said, you always get a total amount. I said, "Tell me,
Was it a text or email?
so I had to have another one.
What I'm talking about is,
But I thought,
about they wanted to do some service.
my preventive medicine.
I think we should start so that we can finish. That'd be okay with y'all? Glad you're here tonight. We're in 1 Timothy chapter 6. Glenn, would you mind leading us in prayer to start?
Let's pray together. Holy Father, great God, we come to you through your Son Jesus, and we thank you for listening to us, and we approach you tonight. And as we start this class, we ask you to be with David as he guides us. We thank you for him and for his life. And we thank you, Father, for your everlasting eternal word that we know that you have designed through your Spirit to be able to get into our hearts and to help us to be who we need to be, how to glorify you, and how to live at peace, and how to enjoy life to the fullest if we'll listen to it. And so we pray tonight that as we open this passage up in 1 Timothy 6, that we'll hear you, we'll hear what you have to say to us, we'll improve our relationships, and that we will bless each other, and that we will be blessed by what we hear. Strengthen us, O Father, and please forgive us. And we ask this through Jesus. Amen.
Well, Glenn tells me that he got through most of chapter 5 last week, except for maybe the last 3 verses, and I decided to not really go into those very much. But you have this little verse there that's so interesting that people who don't know the Bible at all know that this verse is in the Bible. So, and it's verse 23, no longer drink any water. Did you talk about that last week?
No, we didn't get on the wine drinking.
Okay. No longer drink only water, but use a little wine for the sake of your stomach and your frequent movement. We get reminded at different points in this letter that it's a personal letter. It's something Paul wrote to Timothy, and we study it and we dissect it and we tear it apart, but really it's just a personal letter. So this is Paul's effort to tell Timothy some important lessons on how to manage a church, how to be the minister of a church. And so these 2 letters, 1st and 2nd Timothy, and Titus, sort of form that kind of we call them the pastoral epistles because they were pastors, they were leaders in those churches, or as pastoral in nature. But here he takes a real personal turn because obviously Timothy had some medical problem, not necessarily medical. I don't mean to say that. It appears that Timothy was real fastidious about avoiding wine, and so the wine was safer to drink than the water was back in those days. You know, there were so many waterborne illnesses. Probably a lot of us have traveled in parts of the world where the don't drink the water is a suggestion you only violate once, if you know what I mean. It can hit you like, Montezuma's Revenge is a real thing. Water around there. And some of the locals drink it because they're used to it, but we're not used to the microbes that they've got in their water, and it affects us badly. Well, the water in the 1st century, a lot of it just, had waterborne illnesses, and a little bit of alcohol in the water killed those microbes. And so, they drink wine. They would put wine in water to sanitize it. So, it was common. and I think people make a little too much about this verse because it's definitely just a personal verse, and it has to do with a medical problem. And alcohol can be medicinal. You know, people joke about that. They have for years and centuries. They talk about, oh, I'm taking a little alcohol, but it's medicinal. Yeah, you're an alcoholic, but it's medicinal. But it definitely has a doctor prescribed some pain medicine for me one time that it was liquid and had alcohol in it. If you take NyQuil, that has alcohol in it. I don't know if you knew that. And they look at you funny if you buy 20 bottles. I'll just tell you that right off the bat.
Back home, I drive a school bus for field trips, and so I learned a lot of these field trips. You know, in early America, when they had the Boston Tea Party, a lot of people don't know why tea was such a big deal. They figured out that if they made tea, they didn't get sick. And they didn't know about microbes and all that, but if they made tea, they didn't get sick. And that's why they wanted the tea, because if they drank the water, it made them sick. And what they were doing was when they boiled the water to make the tea, it was killing the microbes. It's kind of a similar kind of thing.
That makes sense. Well, we have a family legend in my family. I was probably 10 years old or so. My grandparents lived in northern Arkansas and in a dry county. And the doctor told my grandmother she should get a little wine and water it down and take it because she was having some stomach problems. And so we piled the whole family in the car and we drove up to the state line where there was a liquor store. And Dad went in to buy alcohol. My dad was a young-looking man, always. I mean, when he died at age 58, but he did not look that old. When I worked down in Opelika, Alabama, my mom came down to visit me, and people said, "Oh, I met your brother and your mother." Dad was very young looking. So the legend is that the liquor store thought he was too young to buy alcohol. He was probably in his 30s at the time, and said, "Oh yeah, anybody can fake an ID." When he pulled out his driver's license, so they didn't. So he came out to the car and said, "Can't do it." And Mom went in and bought it. So, and, yeah, but I don't know what. I just thought we'd stop and talk about that. It was a different situation, a different time, and people drank wine on a daily basis. It was just safer to drink than water. And so if Timothy was abstaining, it was affecting his health. Paul says, it's okay. It's okay to take a little bit for your stomach. Anything else you want to say about that?
My stomach hurt.
Steve Weaver Sunday morning talked about it a good while, and he's correct. And the Bible does not say you cannot take a drink. I mean, just to be real. I mean, in our day and time, it's not a good thing. And with the problems he's had, and some of the other people in the class who had problems, I don't think any of them would tell you that it's just, play around with it and see what happens. It's not a good idea. But drunkenness, yeah, the Bible has a lot to say about that. And we just had that section in chapter 3 where elders are not to be addicted to wine, but the deacons couldn't be addicted to a little bit, not addicted to much wine. So, I don't know what to make of that.
I'm not advocating anything here, but, Psalm 104:15 says, wine that gladdens the human heart, and then,
Oh yeah, there's all kinds of verses like that.
drink your wine with a merry heart, so.
Yeah. Ecclesiastes talks about it a lot, like, hey, your life is short and doesn't mean anything, so why not just drink? Pessimistic wisdom literature is what my teacher called it in college. Yeah, there's stuff like that throughout there, but there's also all the warnings about overdoing it. Okay, then he goes into a little section there that just basically says, the last 2 verses of chapter 5 says, some people do bad things and you know about it. And it's evident. They got caught, whatever. Other people, they do bad things and it's not well known. That's all he says. It's just, I think it's Paul telling Timothy, when you deal with people, don't ever assume you know the whole story. Okay? Don't ever assume you know the whole story. Because people have things that, you know, you look at their lives and, well, I just assume everybody in here has something that you could probably share with us that, as a prayer request. Something's going on in your life right now, but I don't know what it is. And I may, you know, the jokes I made about alcohol, it may hit you hard, and maybe that's not the thing to do. But all of us have something. And what he's saying is, you don't know what's going on in people's lives. And some people, they've got things going on you don't know about. And so be full of grace, I think he would say. Give people the benefit of the doubt. Don't jump to conclusions, because you don't know. So let's jump into chapter 6 and see how far we get. My plan is to finish it because there's sections here that we've already dealt with, like this whole section on false teachers. I don't really feel like we need to go back over false teachers, except for some things that stand out because they're a little different. But the chapter, if we looked at what's here, he's going to talk about slaves, bondservants. We'll talk about the difference. False teachers, godliness. He's going to say that false teachers, some of the problems is they think that godliness is a means to gain. They think that preaching the gospel is a way to make money. Right? And that's their main motivation. And we've probably known people like that. I worked with a guy one time. I was on staff. He was a pulpit minister. All he talked about was how much he wasn't getting paid. And it was a major problem for him. I should be paid more. He just, I mean, I didn't know, at that time, I didn't know a preacher who couldn't say that. He couldn't say, hey, I need to be paid more. Did you talk about elders last week, worthy of double honor? You know? And I think, it's my opinion, I don't know what you said. My opinion is the elders are worth it. I'm not saying we pay them twice, but some elders were being paid. I think what he's saying is they're worth more than we're paying them. And when we talk about Danny and the staff here, the people getting salary, every one of them is worth more than we're paying them. It's just the nature of the beast. Now, I think we're paying a lot better than we did a few years ago, in churches especially. I've known preachers that have gone through their preaching career, always lived in the house the church owned, and they get to retirement, they don't have anything. They basically were always counting on the church to continue to provide their support. And there's some preachers, it's an aside, early on in their career, probably somebody told them, you know, if you opt out of Social Security, you could save a lot of money on your taxes every year. But then if you could say you had a conscientious objection to receiving public assistance like that, and you could. But then when you get that retirement age, it won't be there because you never paid anything in. So, kind of, okay. We're going to talk about money tonight, so it sort of fits. Let's talk about slaves. Okay. Love of money, use of money. And he tells him to flee these things, pursue these things, and he talks about some things at the end. Question, does the Bible condone slavery? Let's read the verses 1 and 2. That all those who are under a yoke as bondservants regard their own masters as worthy of all honor, so that the name of God and the teaching may not be reviled. Those who have believing masters must not be disrespectful on the ground that they are brothers. Rather, they must serve all the better, since those who benefit from their good service are believers and beloved. Okay, some people are really bothered by the fact that the Bible tends to regulate slavery, but doesn't ever condemn it. Now, people will say that the principles laid down in the Bible, you know, love God, love your neighbor, you know, mutual love and support, eventually contributed to the downfall of slavery in England, in the United States, and other countries which practiced a type of slavery, what we call chattel slavery, where people were treated as property. You bought them and sold them like you did your horses and your cows. And so they're bothered by the fact that the Bible regulates slavery but doesn't ever condemn it. I will say that sometimes we get a little messed up by translations. The word doulos in the Greek is the word that's translated as slave in the King James Version and some of the older versions. A lot of newer versions will use the word bondservant. There is a difference between a slave and a bondservant, and both were going on at the time. This word doulos in our section probably refers to people who entered into some sort of contract with someone, either to pay off a debt. In the early times of America, they did it to learn a trade. That's what Ben Franklin. He was an indentured servant to his brother, but it was designed to teach him a trade. And then he broke the contract and ran away. He actually became a fugitive, Ben Franklin, from an indentured servitude kind of arrangement. And that's probably in our national history the closest thing we have to what a bondservant was in the first century. Someone who voluntarily entered into, or maybe to pay off a debt as a crime. Maybe it was punishment for a crime, couldn't be a slave for a period of time. One of the sources I found had this definition: a bondservant's servitude was often for a specific period of time or condition, like paying off a debt or punishment for a crime, and may be involved in a different set of rights compared to the chattel slavery that often involved race-based ownership. I don't know. Some writers say that Paul knew it was wrong, but could not address it. Preaching the gospel was more important than tackling this pervasive social issue in their time. I don't know that I would agree with that. I think it may have been one of those things that everybody said, it's just the way the economy works at this time. But I don't think if Paul was talking about the kind of slavery that happened in the South before the Civil War. I don't think he was talking about that kind of slavery. I think he was talking about the bondservant. And so, to me, that kind of helps the situation. Anybody have a comment on that? We don't want to, it's just the first two verses.
I searched AI, just curious, and that, you mentioned that, slavery was a foundational institution of Roman society. So, you have millions of people who are slaves. Sure. Like when you're sharing God's word, I mean, it's going to be addressed to those people, right? I mean, it wouldn't be different than that on a large population of people.
Well, and we can tell, like you read the book of Philemon, which is Paul returning a runaway slave to his master, his owner, whatever. And you can tell from reading between the lines there, reading the actual words there, that Paul was probably not a major supporter of the institution, but it was, as you say, it was pervasive. It'd been in practice for hundreds and thousands of years. Many times it was, if you were conquered by someone, you would be carried off to that country and you would serve as a slave in that country. Again, sort of race-based. You know, you're not one of us, so we're going to make you work. And we need this. The Israelites were slaves in Egypt.
Yeah, I was going to bring up that exact thing too, because I don't know when exactly this book was written, but I do know the fall of Jerusalem was AD 70, and I think we're kind of getting close to that.
Probably 20, 30 years before, but yeah.
Right. So if you think about like the people that were going to be in the situation of slavery, as in a lot of Jewish people, or even people, and I think this is in Ephesus, so already conquered territory, you know, kind of people, like this probably really did directly apply to them, for one. And for two, I think part of it is not starting this whole like national rebellion thing, which is kind of what would happen if there was a slavery rebellion in Rome, which we see with some people like some of the gladiators and stuff, but anyway.
Spartacus. Yeah, there were slave revolts. incredibly mistreated the people that served them, whether they were bond servants or slaves. It definitely could happen. I think what I've taken from this verse, where are we now?
Just to throw in a side note, Daniel Boone was basically an Indian conservative. He was told he could go to prison or go across the Cumberland Gap. Still, he did because he wanted to. He didn't have a choice.
Well, in the early days of this country, it was a very, very common thing. To learn a trade was probably the most common, you would be provided a living, given food and a place to live, but you were there to learn a trade, and it was only for a short period, or whatever period of time. But, the Bible doesn't attempt to overthrow slavery at this point in history. Just leave it at that. But it does tend to regulate it because it tells these people that are in that situation, some of them are going to have masters who are believing and also Christians, and some of them are going to have masters who are not believing. And basically what he says is if you have an unbelieving master, you should still work hard because they're going to know you're a Christian, and if you don't behave and work and show yourself to be trustworthy, it's going to reflect on the gospel, right? And then he says, if your master is a believing person, don't take advantage of that. Don't use that to say, he's a brother, he won't get on to me, I won't have to work so hard. We're supposed to be on the same plane. Galatians 3 says there's no bond or free. There's no slave or free. That distinction disappears in the gospel. And I'm sure that you had situations where a slave and the master both attended the same church and would sit in didn't have pews. Well, I don't know what they said. They would sit there as brothers or sisters or whatever. So I think that if we're going to find an application for this, it should be in an employer-employee relationship, okay? Because we don't have, there's not slavery here. We could pass over these verses and say they don't apply to us at all. But yet the principle does apply that in a work situation, if you're working for a Christian, you should not take advantage of the fact that he won't fire you because you go to church with him, right? You still have to work and do your job. But if it's an unbelieving people, and not only the person who's your boss, but the people you work around, your behavior reflects on Christianity. And so take care with that, right? I think we could probably share stories all night about some people we worked for, Dave Plus. And, did I say that out loud? I think if you work very long in business, you work for some really good people, and you work for some people that weren't so good, right? And so, a Christian's going to be a Christian regardless of the situation, basically what Paul's saying here. Any comment about that? Any discussion on slavery? Okay. Regard masters as worthy of honor. We talked about all this stuff. Okay. False teachers. We're not going to spend a lot of time with this, but look at starting at verse 3. If anyone teaches a different doctrine and does not agree with the sound words of our Lord Jesus Christ and the teaching that accords with godliness, he is puffed up and conceited and understands nothing. He has an unhealthy craving for controversy and for quarrels about words, which produce envy, dissension, slander, evil suspicions, and constant friction among people who are depraved in mind and deprived of the truth, imagining that godliness is a means of gain. So, a lot of this stuff we've talked about, he returns to a theme that we've already discussed. It's interesting, I wanted to point this out. He says a different gospel. Different from what? He says, if somebody comes, they've got a different gospel. Some versions say if he teaches otherwise. But if what were these false teachers teaching that was different from, what were they departing from? I said it better at first. I said it better the first time. What's different about the different doctrine? What was their standard? That may be the better way to say it. What was the standard that they appealed to?
Someone said you had to be a Jew first.
Yes, that was one of the things that was the false teachers. And they would use the Old Testament to prove that. And kind of effectively, if you think about it. But, okay, what did you say, Glenn? You said something.
I just said the old law, they were trying to apply things of the old law and still make them part of what was under Christ, but he's trying, as he's done several times in different letters to make that difference, so.
Well, I'm up here teaching tonight, and in my life, I use the New Testament quite frequently, and that's a lot of our guide and what we hold as a standard. They didn't have that. They may have had a letter or two floating around, but maybe some hearsay, some word of mouth, but the New Testament, 27 books, does not come together until early 2nd century. So what did they have? Well, I think what Paul was saying is what he said in Galatians. If anyone comes to you and preaches a doctrine that's different from what we told you. And so Paul is really laying himself out as the standard or the touchstone, or here's what you compare. If somebody comes and teaching something, compare it to what I taught you. That's a lot of responsibility on him. Of course, he was Paul, he was handling. But I'm glad that we don't have to have that individual responsibility like Paul did at that time, that we do have the New Testament to appeal to. If someone comes teaching a different doctrine, we compare what that person is teaching to the words of the New Testament, Old Testament, as that applies. But we have a standard. We have something we can compare to. So that's all I want to say about that. Anybody else want to say something about that?
But then verse, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay, well, I think I'm gonna move the conversation. Well, I just wonder, not that we can't be in great admiration and I don't wanna say disbelief, I think we give a lot of reverence to Paul. And I think that there's a lot of that that's fair. But I also think that there's a certain point where Paul was also human. And there's room to acknowledge that. And I wonder if part of what makes that verse where he says, if they try and teach you something different than what I've taught you, is how much of that is because he and Timothy had a relationship. It's not like he was just telling, this was a personal letter.
It was a personal, yeah, that's right.
And it's not like he was just saying, well, I guess he did in other circumstances, say, take to the church. But he knew those people, is what I'm saying. It wasn't like this person who he had never met. It's not like he hadn't been there teaching him. And he's just saying, just believe what I say. And so he had a personal investment in that. And how much, so I know we always say, I'm glad I'm not Paul, because I wouldn't want people to follow me like Paul was saying, hey guys, you need to follow me. But also, isn't there a certain amount that maybe we should be willing to say, we talked about this. When we sat down with the Bible, we talked about this, and if somebody is trying to tell you something that wasn't in there, don't do it.
Well, and the elders we developed a document, may or may not have read it, called the What We Believe document, and it's online. It was our attempt to kind of say, this is what we teach, this is what's going to be taught here, so that one of the main uses of that was to be able to make sure that the staff would be on the same page with us, because that doesn't always happen. But, that was something that we would never put it on the same level as the Bible, but we would say that we got those principles from the Bible, and that's what we appeal to. In fact, we refer to it in the document. So yeah, having something like that, yeah, but the relationship of Paul and Timothy, Paul was Timothy's mentor. And so, obviously, Timothy would be expected to know what Paul had taught. But you had these guys that would, I mean, the best way to understand it, these guys traveled around city to city and expected to be supported by the church. They would say things like, I come from Jerusalem, James told me to come and talk to you, you know. They would drop names, probably. And they would get people's attention sometimes by, well, he says it, so that controversies, quarrels over words, and, you know, you can, oh my, this is the definition of the internet, which you can go down so many rabbit holes. I don't even look at it I did for a little while. A very short amount of time. I said, this is crazy. But anybody can say anything on the internet, and they get into all sorts of crazy discussions, and I just don't have a use for it. Well, that was going on when these people came from out of town. You know, they had their interpretation, they had their way of doing things, or like Robert said, some of them will come around saying, listen, you can be a Christian, you should be a Christian, but you gotta be a Jew first. Jesus was a Jew. Have you seen that there's a billboard on the bypass that said, Jesus kept the Sabbath, do you? You know, and basically, Jesus kept the Sabbath. Jesus, he said the prayers, the Jews, he was a Jew. So if you want to be like Jesus, don't you want to be like a Jew? Jesus was circumcised. Have you been? You know, this was a real problem in the first century. Paul has some pretty strong words in Galatians about people who would preach that. But that's only one of the things that people went around teaching in the first century. And it was kind of like the Wild West. Anybody could say anything they wanted to, and if they could get people, if they were persuasive enough. You know, Paul would admit that he's not a good orator, a good speaker. And so if these guys come around, and they are, and especially in the Greek cultures, they really valued the talented orators and would follow them. So, you know, that was the problem. But, like I said, we talked about false teachers enough. I didn't want to dwell a long time on that, and it looks like I did anyway. This morbid interest in controversial questions, disputes over words, you can still get into that. So much more. I was thinking about what topic can I refer to that won't, well, I finally decided that I would illustrate this by talking about what some people say about homosexuality. And there's a word in the New Testament, Paul uses it, and says, this is wrong, you shouldn't do this. Well, proponents of homosexuality or whatever, same-sex marriage, whatever, would say he didn't mean homosexuality in the broad sense, he meant a very narrow sense, he meant pedophilia. So people who took advantage of children were being condemned by that word. Well, the problem I have with that is that there was a word for that, and Paul could have used that if he'd wanted to. But there's a lot of discussion about that word. You know, the behavior is like a broad category of behavior, and they wanted to define it very narrowly by looking at only one aspect of the definition of a word. And so you still have this going on, where people, they say, yeah, they follow the Bible, but they will define words differently than maybe like I would. You know, that I'll just use myself. They define different words differently than I would. It seems to me, a principle of biblical interpretation is you go with the most common, the most usual, the most common usage of the word, not the 15th definition down on the dictionary. You go with the most common use of that word. Because of some words, if you do look at all the different ways it's used, you can find something that says it doesn't mean what it says. And people do that on a regular basis. So, I wanted to bring that up because that verse comes up. Disputes about words, not just doctrines, but disputing about individual words. And this is where I wanted to pivot. He says that these guys think that godliness is a means to gain. Now, I don't know how they were making money from the gospel, but they were. maybe they were asking people for support. One writer, I'm too lazy to go back and hit the button and read it to you. But it said maybe they were paid to make lectures. Whatever the case may be, they were using the things that they were teaching to gain money. And Paul has already talked about that in the qualifications of elders, not what was the King James, the filthy lucre, which is not a great translation, but they're not supposed to be lovers of money. They're not supposed to be materialistic, would be probably the word that we would use. And so here these people were thinking that godliness, and I think he probably was saying that a little bit tongue-in-cheek, godliness, their version of godliness, is they think they can make money doing this. And so he pivots here to go from the false teachers to talk about godliness, which I think is the most important part of the section that we're looking at. Let's read on a little bit from where we were. Godliness with contentment, starting in verse 6. Godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. Does that sound like anybody you've heard speak in the Bible? Pop quiz. Who said something like that?
Jesus did.
Hmm?
Jesus did.
Yeah, who else?
Mm-hmm.
Job did. You remember that? It's not up there. Job chapter 1. He said, naked I come from, the womb, I will turn the same way. The Lord gives, and the Lord takes away, right? And so that's the thought here. We brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these will we be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, and many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves through with many pangs. Now you also have to jump down a little bit. We're going to talk about these verses in a little bit. You have to kind of tie this into verses 17 to 19. Because here he talks about the problem of materialism and living for money. And then in verses 17 through 19, he's going to tell us what to do with the money. Okay? He's going to give us some suggestions. We'll talk about that in a minute when we get to that slide. But he says godliness with contentment is great gain. Yeah, there we go. Godliness. What is godliness? Well, it's being like God. Trying to be like God. Verse 11 says, but as for you, O man of God, flee these things, pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, steadfastness, and gentleness. It's one of those lists that Paul is fond of bringing out. And one of those things is godliness. So, maybe the question is, I think we kind of understand what godliness is, being like God, trying to be like God. But what is godliness with contentment? He modifies it. He says godliness with contentment. What is that?
Looking at God as being the provider of everything for us, and that you are satisfied with the fact that He is giving you everything He thinks you need.
And Paul sort of defines that. He says, if you have food and you have clothing or covering, then you'll be content with that, right? Do you know anybody who's content with food and clothing? That's all they want. It's something to eat, something to wear. I don't know anybody like that, do you? I don't know that I'm the poster child for godliness with contentment. I want more than that. But we have to sort of put ourselves in their culture. And their culture, that was pretty good. That was pretty good. No? I would call that the stink eye. Oh, you got something to say, or you just gonna look at me like that?
I'm just thinking about it,
Okay.
I mean,
people in that culture live from hand to mouth, right?
Well, yes, but they aren't the only people who have ever or will ever live in that way. And I think that possibly we have a cultural standard that makes us callous to that reality and pushes contentment farther and farther out of our grasp.
Okay. I think you're probably right about that. And one of the main purveyors of that philosophy is just advertising. You know, I have been so put out. Okay, I watch programs I like, and the programs that I like have ads that are aimed at people like me.
Algorithms.
Right. So, you know, funeral homes and
Oh,
Whole life, yes.
oh, and every one of it, medicine, and here are the side effects. I am just so amused at. And there was one that was, it's an RSV vaccine,
Okay.
and it has people doing happy, like, and then all of a sudden it just cuts off, and there's this flat line with the beep. You know, it's like, if you don't get vaccinated, you will die. That's what they're saying.
It could be that.
Now, what's interesting is now the same ad plays, but they got rid of the beep. They just have the flat line. But how, so much of advertising is at people my age, is a fear-based thing. You may not have enough, you can't do this, somebody might forge a document and steal the equity in your home. You need a title law. Because this could happen. Oh, the RSV thing, the mortality rate of RSV is 0.02 to 0.03%, which is like,
Really dangerous for really very old people, though.
it is very dangerous for really old people, I agree.
You could,
But on a population wide, I mean, they're aiming at, they're wanting people like me who are not in that category to get vaccinated, right?
Well, sidebar of that too, the FDA goes through less strict regulations to improve vaccines than it does oral medicines, so it's quicker to product and to market, and they have less oversight over the commercials that they can say for vaccines. That's why you notice last 5-10 years, the vaccine numbers from pharma companies being advertised has skyrocketed.
Yeah. It's
They
got
don't
to
have
be
to go through a lot of the same strict clinical trials that the oral medicines.
Well, if you look, this is the way I look at advertising. If you see a lot of advertising about a certain industry, that means that industry is doing pretty well, right? Like, and I see insurance companies and I see pharmaceutical companies, yeah.
okay, so back to the question. The question is, how? If the goal is godliness with contentment, I just think that we're at a disadvantage.
Okay, we are, because
We're not real good at contentment.
our culture is pulling us the other way.
So I wanna know how.
How to have godliness with contentment?
Yeah, I would.
I was planning to ask you that.
You might have to ask somebody else.
You said it just a minute ago, like you distance yourself from certain things and just like, I'm not getting into that, something that's gonna steal your peace.
Yeah.
That you're allowing, you're giving your time and frustration to, it's like, hold on, is that really worth even getting into it?
A lot of people have signed off of Facebook for that very reason. It's just too negative, too pushing me in the wrong direction. You know, and it may be that one way to have godliness with contentment is to cut out some of these influences. Maybe I should pay a little extra and get streaming services that don't have ads. You know, and I could insulate myself from those things. Maybe. I don't know, Kayla, I don't know how. I think it's the small steps, and probably the direction I would push anybody would be in the direction of simplicity. I think godliness with contentment pushes us toward a simpler life. And realizing, you know, you can dwell all day on what you don't got, but when you stop and think about all the wonderful things we do have, it puts you in another mindset. Yeah, Robert?
I also think that when we are blessed and we do have abundance, that we tend to be more godly and more content when we're sharing and we're reaching out and we're trying to help others. And I think that helps our contentment, and it may help us with that problem of being greedy and self-loving money and all those things associated with it.
I'm glad you brought that up, because we got about 5 minutes left, and I don't want to present the problem without the solution. Verse 17, as for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, or some versions say conceited, or to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God. So don't be, he says, this is some things, don't do this, don't do this. Don't be conceited. Don't think you got all this yourself. You're a self-made man or woman. And so, you know, when you see a turtle on a fence post, what do you know?
Somebody put it in.
Yeah, he didn't get there by himself, right? So when you see a person with a lot of money, they didn't get there by themselves, you know. They may tell you they were self-made, but probably not. So don't set your hopes on the uncertainty of riches. Lately, Don and I have been restructuring some of our investments. We moved from a firm that we worked with in Knoxville when we lived there to somebody local. And boy, just get into that, you know, stocks and bonds and percentages of this and what are we going to do with this money and what if it doesn't work out. And you know, just the whole thing is uncertain. You know, the guy told us that the market's going to be down 1 out of 4 years, 3 out of 10. That sounds about right to anybody who understands money. He says, you know, you just got to expect that there are going to be downturns in the market, and you got to weather the storm and move on. But uncertainty of riches is so true, because you could lose it, or somebody can come steal it, or you could just throw it all away. Just read sometime. Find an article, there's several of them, about lottery winners who would tell you that winning the lottery was absolutely the worst thing that ever happened to them. And some of the stories are just bizarre. You know, like people killing each other over the money. People hiring hitmen to kill somebody so they can get the money. One guy, his brother took out a hit on him, hoping that he might inherit some of his brother's money that he got in the lottery. It's not you know, you think that some extra money would make you happy, doesn't it? And many of those people, not everybody, but many of those people end up in the same condition they were before they won the lottery. And some of them even worse, right? So, but what does he say? Don't do this. Don't bank on the uncertainty of riches, but do set your hopes on God. Why? He doesn't talk about the uncertainty of God, does he? No, that's something certain. That's something you can hold on to. That's something that it's not going to be down 1 out of 4 years and 3 out of 10. It's just going to be there, right? Solid, steady. Put your hopes in God. Do good works. Be generous. Ready to share, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. That was a phrase that interested me, because so many people will tell you that the materialistic lifestyle this is living. That's what advertisers tell us. This is really living. It's not really living. He says, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. So I ask the question, if living to get more and more is not truly life, what is it?
You asked for if anybody knew somebody that was content. I have a friend. I won't mention his name, but some of you may know him. He's a modern day cowboy. We graduated together in '78. He's been content his whole life. He's never really amassed anything in his whole life, but he's faithful to the church, never misses. As long as he's got a truck and a horse, he's happy.
And the truck is optional, right?
It is.
Yeah, I think probably we all know some people like that, and we probably need to pay more attention to those people than the billionaires in the world. There was a story about some young 20-year-old guys in their early 20s. They had to be younger than 23 because the guy that started Facebook was a billionaire at 23, and these guys are billionaires at a lower age than that, over some AI product that they've developed. just can't imagine. Can't imagine having that much money in my 20s, what I would do with it. How stupid I would be with it. So, but he says the answer is do good and be generous. You know, if you got something, share with somebody else. I was a quote that hit me, a guy, I can't remember, I think his name was Mitch Snyder. He was an advocate for the homeless. And he says, anyone with 2 pairs of shoes is a thief, as long as there's somebody with none. And that's pretty radical, right? I mean, I got more than 2 pairs of shoes. I don't think of myself as a thief. Some of us have a lot more than 2 pairs of shoes. But there is that side of things. There's some people that don't have, and so we need to share. And I think that's the difference. The solution for materialism, the solution for the love of money, which is the root of all kinds of evil, he says, do good and be generous. In our business day, that was a pretty good lesson, wasn't it? For people, do good and be generous. And there are some tremendously generous people in the world. I'm just surprised at how generous they were. And I've been surprised at some people how ungenerous they were. Okay, I think we're past time. I don't think I covered everything in 6. It's up to you if you want to jump back and pick up some of that stuff next week or go into 7. Thanks for being here.
So, remember the story, does your house smell like a skunk? No, I didn't know the name. Yeah, my daughter was dancing.
Actually, Abby has more.
Sent me text while
You have more to say. About anything. She said, I said one thing.
I went to the store and I bought 3 gallons of straight a large portion of my yard. A lot of my business seemed to, and I know where he was laying his yard, so straight out through the heavy. None of my business seemed to, oh, absolutely. Yeah, that morning I got up, I put my rubber boots on, and took the trash bag out. And I was able to do the morning, took a short and stick right on him, and he almost fit the little put him in the bag, tied it up, and I walked down to it.
I mean, you said, wait, I'll tell you more later, and then you just,
I literally, bag and all went in the fridge. Got rid of it. That's, I sprayed on there.
Ecclesiastes in the wine.
And then I also said, both of them.
Ecclesiastes in the wine.
But Jeanette said she could smell them, she could still smell a little bit. There's no need in washing the dog.
Couple.
So I had let them in.
It's the Hebrew word. It's the Hebrew word for, I think it's a word for baby. And it's like, talks about, like,
You look
how
at
it's
it,
okay.
the 2 most common things.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I also think it's not.
See, I could look, my dog, when it had it, the other dog was white.
That's what I was saying. That's what I was, okay, that's what I had hot take on. But what I'm saying is, you know, you've been with these people, and,
So anyway, so
we
you
talked
spit it,
about this.
and
And
I
then
said,
it's
you
when
know,
he's
let's
not
get
saying,
another
like,
day,
I'm
it'd
called,
be nice
I
if it rained,
am the God.
and then I'll do it after
Here's
that.
what I think.
Go ahead.
It's a candy wrapper. I learned something on those wrappers.
But he says, even if we, as an impulse, or an angel from heaven, should
Have you noticed the letters on it, the big letters?
he has to be a curse.
A curse.
That looks like
So,
Snickers, like
and then he goes on to say how he
That
was
was combat.
Jesus Christ himself.
Beautiful
And
revelation.
that's gonna be scripture.
A grandchild of
So
his.
I kind of
And they were,
you cannot wear
they've
something
already been.
So, this has been a week ago, 2 weeks ago?
I should be a curse for that, because it's not coming from you, unless it's
Was it
coming from
Christ
Christ himself.
entertaining to me?
And it's not good.
Oh, what kind of point? Oh, I don't know what this verse was, but I thought about it a lot, and I don't remember where it is, but he's talking about baptism. And he says, like, he basically says, like, when you baptize baptized
Did
into
you know if you went through all the
Yeah.
Of course not.
snack pieces
And
and
he said,
stickers,
I'm
they
glad
have the
that I
letters
didn't
on it, the
baptize
spell
you,
stickers?
because you would have been saying that you were like,
Each bag.
following
Yeah,
the rules
so
for
she took
baptism
all those out,
or
and found the
whatever,
letters
right? And